Let's get this thing kicked off. Welcome to all of our attendees and anyone watching this on demand afterwards to our webinar today. How much does downtime cost your business, with a major focus on backup and disaster recovery? We got three wonderful experts with me today. Obviously not myself, I'm just the moderator. But with me here from Charles IT, I have Wayne Curtis. Does a lot of backup and disaster recovery work on a day-to-day basis. I have Ryan from Phalcon, Director of IT over there. And then Brian Dotty is remote here, working with Kaseya and Datto. So I'll let these guys introduce themselves a little bit. Wayne, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I am Wayne Curtis. I've worked at Charles IT for about 9 years now. Been in IT for about 20 years, which makes me sound super old. And have worn every hat from account management to help desk technician to now I'm in a technical solutions architect role, trying to just come up with solutions to customer problems. And but yeah, kind of do whatever role comes along that's needed for the business at the time.
Great. Brian?
Ryan Koupal. I'm the Director of IT at Phalcon. I have about 25 years of IT experience, mixture of working at MSPs and working in-house on the IT side. My Datto experience is actually started pretty early on with a product back when they were kind of a small shop. Back then I think it was a handful of guys. It was turned to a nationwide product. So I've experienced it for quite some time.
So Brian?
Awesome. So I'm Brian Dotty. I'm one of the channel development managers here at Kaseya and Datto. So I've been in the industry for a long time now, mostly on the sales side of things, but I've worked for an MSP for a couple of years, and I've dealt with some of the challenges that come along the way there, and helping clients become more secure, looking at their security posture and things like that. And business continuity and disaster recovery was always at the center of that conversation. And so it's something that's very near and dear to my heart.
Great. Awesome. And with that, let's get it kicked off. So introducing first, what is backup and disaster recovery? So, I mean, from my perspective, before I started working here, all I thought backup and disaster recovery was, or backup to be specific, was just updating your iPhone before you got a new one kind of thing. And I've come to realize that it's actually a lot more than that. So I'll let these guys, the experts, talk about it a little bit. Wayne, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, my 6-year-old daughter asked me this last night when I told her I was doing a webinar. She's like, "What is that?" And I was like trying to find a good way to explain what it was to a 6-year-old. Because I'm like, maybe this would help connect with the audience a little bit. But basically, it's the act of preparing for when things go wrong, whether it's fire, flood, failed Windows update, bad actors trying to hack into your systems, or just a user error. Someone simply deletes a file. It's about making sure that your business data is replicated somewhere else, and that you have another copy of it, so that if when things go bad, you can get it back. What it's not is just saying, I turned on backups, and then just assuming that you're good. You can't leave it at that. You can't just say I turned on backups and then just assume that you're covered. We're going to kind of get into a little bit of that, of why you need more than that in terms of having an actual DR plan, having a plan for what you're going to do when things go wrong. Is that what it means to you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, it's along those lines. I mean, it's a removal of single points of failure, multiple copies of data. And then obviously you have the whole budget aspect. I mean, having that fit around whatever budget you have for your DR and backup plan.
Yeah, Brian, and then from your perspective, I know Datto is specialist in backup disaster recovery. If you have anything else to add there.
Absolutely. I mean, I really lean in on the planning aspect of things, because I don't know, who was that great philosopher that said you always have a plan until you get punched in the mouth. and the idea about it is, like, you don't run the fire drill on the day of a fire, right? You need to do this stuff. I think somebody said it before, when minds are calm, when the seas are calm, putting that plan together, and it does incorporate technology, of course, and technology that we're happy to provide and we've been working on for many years now. And the thing of it is, though, is that it's more comprehensive. And I think, Wayne, you alluded to that. It's not just hitting that, like, yeah, I've I bought backup, so we're good now, right? And it's not so simple. It's more comprehensive than that, and about having that plan in place for how things are going to operate in what might be the worst day for that business, right? And that's the thing to think about. You're going to be stressed out when that happens. You really don't want to try to wing it. Um, during the heat of the moment, right? And I've seen a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
Right. I used to work with someone that would always say it's not we're not selling you backup. We don't want to talk about backup. Backup isn't really what's important here. The important thing is the recovery. Backup doesn't matter if you can't recover it, or when you go to recover it, it's not in a way that you can easily get access to it and basically get the business up and running again. So we've all had our MSP experience. We've all been through different trials and tribulations. One story I had was like a customer had they were backing everything up to AWS and Glacier, and it was a very slow restore process. But the data was there, but when their device died and they needed to get the data back, it was taking them it was going to take them days to re-download it all. And it was great for a file. If I deleted a file, okay, I can go pull that back down. It's just take a few minutes. But then when you were like, oh, this is terabytes of data, I want to get it all back because the RAID failed or the device failed. It was going to take too long to get it, and the business was going to suffer in the meantime. So it's all about recovery to me, and just having that plan and having it made sure that it's tried and tested, and so that you know exactly what's going on. Because the worst thing I can imagine is coming into work and being like, everything's down. It's going to take me 2 weeks to get the data back on site, and telling the business owner that they got to wait 2 weeks for this stuff they're going to be like, what do you mean 2 weeks? I thought we had this backed up. And be like, yeah, I had it backed up. Well, that's kind of worthless if we have to be down for 2 weeks.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Go ahead and move forward. And I want to say real quick to all the attendees, if you guys have any questions throughout, there's a Q&A button on the screen here. If you guys want any of your questions answered by our experts here, feel free. I mean, obviously our goal is to answer any questions you may have with the presentation, but if you do have any extras, then we are happy to help out and answer them at the end. So what are the different types of backup disaster recovery solutions?
Yeah, so obviously there's tons of different types. You can Google BDR, you can Google server backups, cloud backups. There's a million different ones out there. We at Charles IT like the Datto products just because it ticks off a lot of boxes, and really just has a lot of flexibility in terms of like what you can back up, how you can restore it, all that stuff. And then it also just comes with the table stakes of offsite virtualization and things like that. But some of the main components of a backup solution are, or the ways you might define one is a file level backup versus an image level backup. And the difference there is just doing a file level backup, you're just backing up individual files, and you can restore individual files. That's not the same as what's an image level backup, which is when you talk about image, it's basically like you can back up an entire server and just boot it back up in the same fashion that it was running previously. If we're just doing a file backup, great, I can go get those files and move them onto a server or drop them back onto a person's computer. But an image level backup is going to be different in the sense that I can actually restore the entire server back to the way it was running before the event. Obviously, with virtualization, and maybe this isn't obvious to all the attendees, but virtualization was a game changer in the backup arena because it made it so that servers were no longer linked to the bare metal, to the actual hardware that they were running on, and it made backup and disaster recovery a lot easier, which is one of the main reasons we recommend virtualization wherever possible. Have those servers running in a way that we can restore them onto, so that the servers themselves, in effect, are files, and we can restore those onto unlike hardware onto different types of hardware so that you have faster recoverability in disaster scenarios. What I tried to make this example to my 6-year-old last night of like what a backup might be. And I use my phone as an example of, if this phone, if I ran over it with my car right now, I wouldn't lose all my pictures because the pictures are backed up to iCloud. And that is a form of a BDR solution. Like if I lost that iPhone, the pictures aren't gone. I can just restore them right from the cloud. And that's something that I think we take for granted that exists and it works so well. Like I remember back when smartphones were just becoming a thing that like people were losing their pictures all the time because that didn't exist. iCloud wasn't a thing. We didn't have Google backing up our phones all the time. And now it's just built into the software. And I think, like I said, we take that for granted and we just assume that my phone does it. Why doesn't my business and my server? And that takes a little bit more work to figure out and set up. But so maybe Brian, you can tell us a little bit about how Datto takes that approach with the same approach as like an iPhone, or how does Datto?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that you're capturing everything in that server, right? In that infrastructure that you have there, and that includes the operating system and things like that. When you're talking about a file level backup, and typically those go direct to the cloud, right, or some offsite location, those kind of file level backups, they don't capture all the intricacies of the operating system, right? And that's really hard to restore that way. And as you were talking about, Wayne, that adds a lot of time to the recovery, right? So yeah, you can go pick a file out of there here and there that you need, and that's useful. But to be able to, we use the term spin up or virtualize an entire system on a secondary device or even in the cloud, where it's as if that server's running still, right? It's as if it's just somebody just flicked the switch and turned it on. And that is really what's kind of happening behind the scenes with a little bit more technology behind it. But the idea is that system is now operational and running, and your business can continue its operational pieces that it needs there. So whereas with a file system, you have to restore it to something. So, and I know, Wayne, you were talking about having bare metal and similar hardware. That was always such a pain, right? I remember going through that. In fact, at one point in time, we were still using tape, and I had some clients that would not let go of their tape backups. Those were file level backups, and to restore that would take days. But on top of just that restoration process, bringing in the new hardware that you were going to, that like, okay, this is going to replace the old stuff or the stuff that was damaged or whatever happened to it, that process took so much more time. Whereas with virtualization and a true BDR solution, you're able to spin that server up virtually in the cloud or on a device on-prem and keep that business flowing. And you don't have to worry about the hardware and stuff coming in and configuring things. That will happen, but in the meantime, your business can stay afloat. And that's the big difference between the two types there.
One of the big pushes that we're seeing, or one of the big initiatives that we're seeing around backup and disaster recovery, is traditionally when you would go to something like Office 365 for your email or Google for your email, that was always considered, well, it's in the cloud. I don't need to back it up. They handle that stuff. And I think it's become more and more apparent that Microsoft and Google like wash their hands of that. They're like saying like, yes, we keep multiple copies, but we don't really do a quote unquote backup of your data. So one move we've seen the industry going in recently is a different type of backup, which is that you protect the files and emails and things like that are all in your cloud, your Office 365 or Google Public Cloud. You're making sure that those are being backed up as well as the stuff that's on-prem. And when we say on-prem, we're talking about on the customer premise, on site with you where your servers live. So that's a big shift we've seen, is that people are making sure that they're protecting your email and the files that might exist in your OneDrive or your SharePoint, and making sure that you have multiple copies of those things. A lot of customers come to me and say, oh yeah, I use OneDrive for backup. And that I cringe, because it's not yes, it's getting a copy of your files off your computer maybe, or replicating what's on your computer, but it's not backing it up. It's not keeping multiple copies off site that you can restore to. And yes, there are revisions, but there's things that can go wrong. There's bad actors that can attack that kind of stuff. And it's good to have a secondary option, and just making sure that you have that workload backed up as well is a thing that we're seeing that a lot of customers don't do right now. Just
that's
good.
That's absolutely right. I see it all the time. We call it a shared responsibility model, because when that data lived on the server, on-prem, as we say, it was a little bit different, because that owner of that data had to manage the uptime and security and availability. All of that was the responsibility of whoever owned that technology. But when people move their data off to the cloud, they kind of assume that, oh, all that responsibility went with it, and it's now not in my hands. It's all Microsoft's problem, or it's all Google's problem. But see, the thing is that Microsoft has teams of lawyers, and if you read those T's and C's, which I know everyone sits there and reads those T's and C's thoroughly, Microsoft talks about it in their user agreement that you should be using a third-party backup solution, not from them specifically. And they point that out several times. And while we call it a shared responsibility model, I call it a CYA model, right, for Microsoft. And, the point is that they're not responsible if somebody gains access to your tenant, right, to your login, so to speak. And the tools that are available inside of, whether it's Google or Microsoft, they're actually pretty detailed technical tools. They can do some scripting and things like that. They can create new users. And so there's a lot of threat still that exists in those SaaS platforms that I think a lot of people overlook very easy. And it's very easy to overlook it, right?
Right. Is that something that Phalcon has considered? Like, do you worry about your Office 365 data?
So we actually use another Kaseya product, Spanning, to cover that, because the misconception is that deleted emails recoverable. By default, I mean, it's a 14-day window for Microsoft, right? Which a lot of people are surprised to learn when they want to get something back.
So it's something that you guys have made the decision to make sure that is backed up in addition to your on-prem stuff.
Yep.
Awesome. Backups on top of backups always. Moving forward, how often should organizations' data be backed up? I know, going back to my original example of learning about backups because of getting a new iPhone, backing it up and downloading it to the new one, I would just back it up the day that I got the new one. I know that's obviously not best practice here, so I would love to see how often you guys think is actually best practice.
Yeah, so to me, this depends totally on what your goals are as an organization, how much tolerance you have for downtime. We usually sit down with the customer and ask those questions. Like the two main components are what's called RTO and RPO, recovery time objective and recovery point objective. RTO focuses more on the time it takes to restore, actually from the moment of the disaster to when you have those resources available to the end users again. And you're really talking about just the speed of recovery. So if it's noon on a Wednesday, is it going to take me 24 hours to get that stuff available, or 1 hour? That's all. It depends on your business, like what you can sustain. So we usually ask that question of like, how long can you be without this application or data or function? recovery point objective is more about how much rework you need to do. So if you had a disaster again at noon on a Wednesday, and you had to roll back to maybe you in the old tape backup model, you ran backups once a night, you just lost everything from when people came in at say 8:30 in the morning until noon. All that data is gone, and you either need to redo it, like have people re-enter that data, or say you have to reprocess all those sales orders. It's all, you have to redo that work, and that's again a discussion with the customer to say, what do you what's okay for you, and then it's a conversation of what that cost is to maybe reduce that recovery point from 12 hours to 1 hour. What we at Charles IT, our best practice and what we strive for is backups once an hour. That way, if you're in the middle of a Word document and it's 7 o'clock at night, or we've had people call us at 2 a.m. saying, I've been working on this Word document for the last for 6 hours and I forgot to hit save. We're able to go back and in some cases restore that, or maybe they restore it from an hour ago and basically save them all that lost work, or they saved over it, and after they had deleted a bunch of stuff. So we like to be able to be the hero there and say, well, here it is from 1 hour. You only lost 1 hour of work, versus if it was running once a day, you're out 24 hours. You lost that entire document if it hadn't hit that backup window yet. Is there any special sauce or considerations you use, Ryan?
Well, I mean, I usually try to consider how dynamic the data is. For example, most organizations have a location where they keep archival data. So something like that, you would target less frequency, remote desktop servers, which again, don't have data stored on it per se. It's more of infrequent changes. So I like to look at it, based on the needs of the workload.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And my time as an MSP, that was really the discussions that we were having with our clients too. It's how much can you tolerate losing, right? That's the conversation that you have to, and it's sort of not to sound like bleak or anything like that, because it's something that comes up a lot too. And it's like, well, what's the reality of this situation? And you think about all the threats that exist out there that could compromise this data, and it's like, well, yeah, you should have a plan in place and know what that means to you. And like you were saying, Wayne, if you could lose an hour's worth of work, if that doesn't cost your organization that much, then okay, that's fine. But if it's a half a day, and to Ryan's point, maybe that data hasn't changed much in that 4-hour time period. So maybe you don't need to be doing backups as often, and it changes for every organization. So it's important that, and this is something we tell end clients all the time, is to make sure that you're having a conversation with a reliable IT company that can work with you and determine what's going to best suit your business, right?
Yep. And it's something that I used to get into a lot with when I was doing we would do these business impact analyses and try to figure out how your business could be affected by disasters. And one thing I would always run into, again, this is a bit of a dated model, but we'd go see customers and they were only thinking about that RPO. They were backing up their servers maybe once an hour, and they were like, I'm covered, I'm backed up once an hour. But that doesn't really fit the RTO thing. You can't go to the business owner and say, great, I have backups, but you can't, it's going to take me 2 weeks to restore it, because when it was a physical server and you needed that very specific RAID controller to restore back onto, and without that, you needed to change your whole recovery model, and you had to build a new server, install Windows, and then restore the files and redo all those operating system settings that Brian was talking about. It could be days before you get that stuff up, and the business owners were never really connected to those decisions, and they were just told, I'm making backups once an hour, and every time I've asked them to get me that file that I lost, they've been able to get it, so my backups are good. When in reality, if that big disaster hit where they lost those physical servers, they would have been down for days. And that was always a big eye opener and always a, we talk about the cost. The title of this was, what is the cost of downtime? And that's the hidden cost, is when your business can't function for days, there's a lot of calculators online. Datto has one that I think we'll talk about later, but that can help you determine exactly what that cost is. There's a lot of variables involved. Obviously, what you pay your employees, what the potential lost sales were, or potential rework. Like what if you had to go rework and do 12 hours of the same work that you had just lost, like what the cost for that is. But that all goes into the equation, and really the business owner has to be briefed on that so that they can decide, should I bolster my backup solution? And is sticking a USB drive into my computer and using the built-in Windows backup, is that good enough? Or do I need to take that extra step and pay the extra $1 to make sure that it's backed up offsite and that it has just more recovery points and a faster restore time? That's what we at Charles IT love about Datto. It's just, it gives you, we have a ton of flexibility with those recovery times, recovery points, and it doesn't really, like, because of the special sauce that the way the Datto works, we don't run into have problems with having too much data. It's only backing up like the changes and things like that. I'm sure Brian can get into a lot of that now, but that's what we really love the Datto product, because it just gives us so much flexibility in that we can have multiple backups per day, and that it automatically offsites and just cover it, and that gives us tons of restore options.
It's always a painful reality when, someone's using one of those, legacy backup systems, and all that data, we have your data, it's here on this tape, but we can't get access to it for another week until we get all the gear in the rack.
Yeah.
What good does that do at that moment?
And they didn't have a second tape drive somewhere else to actually, like, if the building burned, the tape drive
flooded, yeah.
The tape reader is dead. Now I gotta go find one, and that tape drive reader was 10 years old, and you gotta find one on eBay and hope it works, and then find all the connectors. It's just that, again, these are all kind of like antiquated models, but that's where the industry's come from. And now Datto is lit. For those of you that don't know, the Datto product, at least the BCDR product, is a appliance. It's a server that you bring in, plug it in on your network. Then we connect it to your servers. It grabs all the image level backups that we were talking about earlier, backs them up to that appliance. They get multiple revisions. They get stored on that appliance, and then they also get backed up over your internet connection to the Datto cloud. They give you some restore options where you can either restore it on the appliance or you can restore it in the Datto cloud. I'll let Brian talk more about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's exactly right. And the nice thing about that is that you have computing capabilities in that piece of hardware that sits in your office. And maybe you don't have a server in the office at all anymore. Maybe you've gone to the cloud, but we have a way to do this virtually as well, right? Where you have another piece of equipment, even if it's a virtual piece of equipment, that's providing those computational, that power, right? And that, having storage space and memory and processing power and all that stuff. And when you have a backup that's just sitting on a disk somewhere, that's all it is. It's just the data on a disk. It doesn't have a way to actually run. And so that's where the Datto Cirrus appliance comes into play. We have, like I said, on site, we can have one, but it's replicated to our cloud. And so in the event of a site-wide disaster, maybe a natural disaster hits, or even a major power outage or something like that, we could spin up in the cloud, redirect your traffic to that server running in our cloud, and your business operates as it did before. And that's the idea, is to keep you operational while the behind the scenes things are going on to restore your production systems.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all that. So we'll move on to storage real quick. Where should backups be stored, and how are they restored? I mean, obviously we have the cloud backups, on-site backups, and all that stuff, but What are those best practices there that companies should be following?
Yeah, there was a tried and true thing that we've always followed, I think, as managed service providers, which is having a 3-2-1 backup strategy, which says have 3 copies of your data. You've got your production data, the stuff that you're working on every day, and then at least 2 copies of that on 2 different media. And back in the day, it was have it on disk and have it on tape, and then have at least 1 copy offsite for disaster recovery, so that, you know, if a site-wide disaster happened, it is recoverable.
Yep.
Does Datto, how does Datto check all those boxes?
So absolutely 3-2-1, and now they call it 3-2-1-1. And I believe that extra 1 there now is because what you're talking about is that in that cloud storage is air gapped. And that's where we're housing the data, we're housing those backups in a way where they can't be modified. So beyond encryption, if someone were to get access to your account, steal your credentials, something like that, and that's stuff happens all the time, right? Even in SaaS platforms, they could go in and modify that data or wipe out your backups and then go, put ransomware on your systems or whatever. I mean, I'm not necessarily a hacker, but it's not too hard to figure out how they would apply this and go after your backups first, right? So, air gapped or immutable backups in the cloud have become a thing, right? So you can't just go in and log into some portal and just delete everything out. There's multiple steps involved in having to modify any of those backups. So not only having that offsite, and Wayne nailed it, the 3-2-1 method is tried and true, and we use it still to this day. But now instead of going to a tape, we're putting it in the cloud, and we're air gapping that data so that it can't be accessed at all.
Yeah, we've seen real world scenarios where that immutable backup has been life-saving. Like ransomware these days is so complex. The bad actors out there know small businesses. They know the tools that they use, and they know how to go after those backups and attack them. So it's not good enough anymore just to have backups and offsite backups. Like, they also have to be immutable. So, and just what Brian mentioned is you can't delete them. So they're locked in and kind of air gapped so that no one, hacker can't get access to them. They're not just available. Kind of think of it too as like a recover deleted item. So if you deleted something out of your mailbox and it goes into your deleted item, to delete it out from there, I'll say to you guys, we can always get that back because they're recoverable, and there's another dumpster that those get stored in that we can usually restore from. So we've seen that happen where bad actors have gone in, deleted or encrypted your production data with ransomware. If you're not using some of the advanced ransomware protection tools, they get in through there, they encrypt everything, they hold you ransom and say, you have to pay us $1 million to get your data back. They've deleted my backups. They've encrypted all my production data. What am I supposed to do? We've been able to go back to Datto and pull that immutable backup and say, hey, customer, you're all set. I was able to get it back because they attacked all those things, but we still had that one good copy, and we were able to kind of come in and save the day and restore that. So that's a super important piece.
Yeah, and I think that moving from that into the testing, I think that's probably one of the most important parts, is ensuring that everything works. So, I mean, you can just talk a little bit about that. And
just want to add one thing really quick
sure.
about the immutable data. It also can benefit you if you have a data retention requirements through compliance. You also have that checked as well.
Awesome. Yeah,
That's a good point, Ryan. Yeah, absolutely.
So backups, recoverability, it's all worthless unless you're actually making sure it works. You can't just, like I said, set up a backup and say you're good. A lot of customers come to us and say, I'm busy running my business. I don't have time to do full tests. I came from a finance industry in my early days of IT, and we were required to run a full test every year, and we would take 2 or 3 days out of the year to actually prep, do a full disaster recovery test where we would run off out of a different location. We would assume that our entire office was gone. And we would run it out of a different location. We would spin up every single server and use a different set of desktops, computers to test everything and make sure that we could still process financial transactions and things like that. We don't need you to do that every year. I mean, if you can, great. If you can make sure that your business can avoid those big disasters, that's awesome. But we understand that takes a lot of time. Like, you can't always take 3 full business days to like test your DR plan. So some ways that you can do that and just chip away on it is maybe pick a component and say, I want to make sure that my QuickBooks database is recoverable. I want to make sure that my primary file share is fully backed up and that I can recover it or that I can access it if I have to. So we'll work with you to pick and build whatever plan you want. I like to do that where you pick a different component each year and test it and make sure that take whatever you learned, add it to your DR plan, report that up to your officers at your company and say, hey, we did this test. It took this much time, so that they also are in the know of like what to expect if something hits, and if they can make decisions on the business based on that feedback to say, oh, that's not good enough. We can't be down for 12 hours. Let's spend a couple dollars here to make that better, or let's keep testing it to speed that up. But the more and more you do these tests, the better and better you're going to get at just making them faster and knowing, you're just like anything, you practice it, you get better and faster, and just so that you are prepared. But the biggest thing is just looking out for gross negligence that, oops, I forgot to back up that server, or like making sure that you're covering that when you go to restore something that it's actually out there. And Datto has a lot of things that it does built in to like test these backups for you. We also just recommend like having it top of mind and just doing some type of a test every year to be like, does this work? And restoring a file is not good enough. I would take it as far as to try to like actually have your users or a user log into a server or log into a system and make sure that those things are there. But like I said, Datto has a lot of this that it does for you that maybe Brian can touch on.
Yeah, we actually, so when those backups are taking place, we can actually test the functionality of them for you. So we'll do things like screenshot verification. We actually, behind the scenes, will try to boot up those machines that we know you've been taking those backups on, because we know that if you call us and say, hey, I got to spin these up, we want to be able to say, okay, yeah, your last recovery points, they're good to go. And we'll light those up. We'll see that we can get to a login screen that you can log into that server right there. We even check to make sure some applications are running, things like that. And it can get pretty complex here very quickly. But the big thing too that I like to remind people of is now, more and more we're seeing where cyber liability insurance policies, regulatory compliance bodies are updating their plans and things that they're requiring. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more is, are you testing your backups? How often are they being tested? Things like that come up on a regular basis for these, and they're prerequisites, right? So can you imagine, like, yeah, we're testing our backups, and then they get hit with ransomware, and they go to the insurance company to file a claim, and they go, but your backups didn't work. And so that's where insurance companies are getting away with, not paying out on claims. They're seeing where people weren't doing all the things that they need to do to mitigate that risk. And testing your backups is one of those things that they're including now. And I know the ones that I'm seeing, they're asking for it to be done at least once a year. I don't know if you guys are seeing a higher frequency than that for different policies and things, but the ones I've seen have been once a year so far.
Yeah, it's pretty typical. The other thing I'll add to this is it's not always just about testing backups. Like, this has to go into a bigger planning of business continuity and how does the business function. I mean, we all just got a real world business continuity test with the pandemic a couple of years ago, where everybody had to say, oh my gosh, I need a plan. Like, we all got punched in the face, to use your analogy. Yeah. And we all had to figure out, like, how do my employees work remotely? And that was like a struggle for some businesses. So just having that in your mind of like, what would we do if we all had to work from home? Having a plan for that, because those disasters hit where, to think of a nuclear bomb or a Hurricane Sandy or or another pandemic, like there's just all types of different disasters that can hit, and having a plan for your business of how we would handle this, how we would communicate to our employees to tell them, hey, we're in a disaster scenario and here's what you should do. And then what the IT got, like, it's not just an IT function, like IT can work and restore your stuff and get it running again, but there's a lot more that goes into it. And from what is the communication tree, like who decides we're in this disaster, how do they communicate that to the rest of the company, and how do you get it to your customers, and what does that mean? And just from having a document, like a playbook that you guys can go to that says, all right, we're in a disaster, here's what we're going to do. Like, we like to include stuff like ISP information in those DR plans, power companies, so that we have it all documented, so that if maybe Ryan came down with COVID and his business needs to function without him, here's the plan. You can just say, here's the plan. Someone can go follow it, and they know they can call. Here's the power companies for each of their locations, who they can call to see when that power or that ISP is going to get restored, and start making decisions. It's just having basically a plan written so that when things hit the fan, you know where to go.
All right, moving forward, we're going to talk about some of the common challenges and then how businesses can overcome them. Wayne, want to kick us off there?
Yeah.
You see?
I mean, we've kind of touched on it with the testing, but the biggest challenge to me is like going to go restore something and finding out that you don't have it. So auditing and testing is important from that perspective. One thing we see a lot is, IT guys spin up new servers all the time, and they forget to add it to the backups. Like, so having some process to go make sure that when you add a new workload, that it also gets added to the backup is important. We do a lot of that with our own quarterly business reviews that we do at Charles IT, where we make sure that if you have a new server, that it was added to backup. So we have a lot of these double checks already built into our process, but you should make sure that those are in your business. And if you add a new workload, say, I don't know, you sign up for a new cloud product like Salesforce, like having some type of a process to make sure, hey, should we back this up, or is that covered by is that a shared responsibility thing? Just having some process to make sure that those checks and balances are getting met. But there's other challenges too, like data growth. It doesn't stop. Like, we're always constantly adding more and more files to our businesses. Is that something that you guys run into, Ryan? Do you have some other challenges that you've come across?
Well, I think you touched on one of them. It's what's most important, I think, is having management of the different departments always involve IT with any sort of change, so you can make sure that the process includes IT, that the storage or cloud site is covered in your backup and DR strategy.
Right. If you're about to bring in a 2 terabyte new drawing system that you need to make sure it gets backed up, like that might not fit into your backup scenario. You have to include them and say, do we have capacity to back this up? And
challenge too is that so many of these services are SaaS based now, meaning that anyone can go to a website and sign up for something, and before you know it, you have a handful of people working at a new process, right? And they have data there.
Right. and if IT was never involved, then nobody's backing it up.
Right.
Wow, those are great points, guys. I mean, I feel like you hit a lot of the bases there. Yeah, certainly data leakage or new end users coming on. That's another one. Like, not getting a new user added to that system, right? Making sure everything of theirs is backed up as well. And sometimes that breakdown between client and MSP sometimes gets broken down, or they find out like last minute, right? And then it's like, oh, just do the bare minimum to get this employee onboarded, but then there's those extra steps, right, to make sure all their stuff's backed up. But yeah, when you have organizations that are adding a lot of data, that and I had some clients that were like that would do a lot with CAD drawings, large file size, things like that. So their environment was changing so rapidly. Planning for that, you needed to be a few steps ahead in that process. And so um, I think it's good again for like organizations, just sit down with your MSP, and Charles IT is one of them. It's a great example of how to work with a great MSP to have that plan in place and make sure that, okay, if something changes in that environment, this is how we're going to notify them and make sure it gets brought into the fold there.
Mhm.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the biggest one, which is monitoring.
Yeah.
Making sure that your backups are running. That's a big common one too, where people would be like, they set up backups and then like day 2, they stopped working because of whatever reason. Maybe so making sure that they're running all the time and just make like monitoring to say, did I get a successful backup? Remember back years ago when we would use semantic backup exec, you'd have a job that would get stuck.
I know exactly what
it would be stuck running for 20 days in a row, and you never got it would be like, I didn't get any failure,
never failed.
but you never
Yeah.
got that success either. So like that's a key thing to watch out for, is just make sure that you're getting a successful backup every, whatever your recovery point objectives are, make sure that they're happening on that schedule. And we take care of that at Trails IT for our managed customers, but if you've got your own IT, like in your own department, make sure that you're getting those successful backups.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And we'll move on. It looks like we've lost our camera here, but we're gonna
Lost
try
your
and get
video
that-
feed.
we are gonna try and get that back on for you guys. We'll just shut that off. But we'll move on. Let these guys keep going. You know their voices by now anyway, so we'll keep it going. And then I think we touched on a lot of the backup and disaster recovery best practices throughout the presentation. But is there anything you guys wanted to highlight here? Put any extra emphasis on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a repeat from the one that we talked about earlier, which is like if changes happen. Once in a while, you might find a reason to add an exclusion to your backups. Maybe there's a certain path that you don't want to back up. Maybe an example is you have Ryan mentioned archive data a little while ago. Say you have a file server with a separate drive attached to it that you don't need to back up because it's all archive data and you don't really want to maybe pay to back that stuff up. So you add that whole drive as an exclusion. And then you find out that users start putting more active data there. You want to watch out for those exclusions and watch out for how users are using it, because it could lead to something like someone expecting that was backed up and then find out that you actually excluded it years ago. And that when they go to restore it, you're not looking for it. So we do that as well. We double check all of our exclusions twice a year to make sure that they're still relevant and that we're not using them for anything else. I mentioned it earlier about the whole downtime cost, but there's a great, if you've never done it, I think it's just datto.com/RTO.
Yes.
We'll bring you a little calculator. I would recommend trying it, fill it out for your business, because it is all custom to you in terms of what it might cost you and what you might learn a few things about that by just filling out the calculator. If a disaster happened, there's a little percentage that says like, yes, my end users might be 50% as efficient as they were if they had all their tools available to them. And you can kind of customize it, play with it, put in your own workforce's costs, like what their salaries are, and it'll help you determine what an actual disaster might cost you. But I would recommend trying that out and just getting an idea of what that might be, because you might find that you're not spending enough on backup and that you really should invest in whether it's a Datto VCDR solution or a Datto SaaS protection to make sure that you don't have that cost. It's really just an insurance plan to make sure that you don't have those big expenses or those big losses of data and have to spend money to recover it. Do you have any other best practices you guys can think of?
Yeah. Anybody else have anything to add before we jump into the Q&A real quick?
I feel like we covered the gamut here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did put a link in the chat for the recovery time and downtime cost calculator on our website. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's a safe link. It's not a phishing link.
It's all a test.
Yeah, see who does
Awesome.
it, right?
Great. So we'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A real quick. And like I said before, if anyone has any questions, you guys can feel free to throw them in there still, and we'll try and get to them. If we don't have the time for them, then we will have these guys follow up with you individually. No big deal there. So kicking it off, let's go with the first one. With how important backup and disaster recovery is for companies, why do you believe so many organizations don't have a plan in place? Whoever wants to take that can feel free. Go ahead.
I mean, I could take a stab at it if you want.
Sure.
I think a lot of times organizations, and I know I dealt my personal experience was a lot of organizations, especially small to medium businesses, are finding solutions on their own. They know that backup is something they need. They don't really know the ins and outs of backup. So I ran into a lot of businesses that had put something in place at one point in time. There was not testing done. It was file level. It was inexpensive. And then, here I come in as an IT provider and I'm talking about recovery time objective, recovery point objective, being able to virtualize. And the cost that goes with it is more than what you see with a file level solution. But I think what a lot of people tend to overlook is the cost with that file level solution when you have a data loss event is so much more significant than what you were spending on a true BDR solution out of the gate. So I ran into that a lot. That the cost was a major factor in pushing back, but if you balance that out with the eventual data loss, that's where you're going to make up for it, right?
Right. I think another reason a lot of clients don't have a BDR plan or a business continuity plan is just they're focusing on their business. Like they think of it as an IT function that IT should just be able to do this stuff and handle it. And it does take a lot of investment to do those tests and make sure the stuff's running. So I think they're just a lot of times focused in there. They need to put their focus on a DR plan to make sure that they're not impacted by something like this. So that's again where we can help. Like we can guide you and we can ask those questions and force you guys to address it. But it's really it's not top of mind. They're worrying about running and making money and keeping the business afloat, and not necessarily what happens if the seas get rough. So if it's a smooth seas, no one's worried about like the storm that's coming up. So that's where we try to fit in and help.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Next question. If I have backups of my systems, does that mean that I don't need to worry about upgrading systems as much? Can I keep running my legacy systems forever? And I think that actually goes to the point of a question that I had during the presentation as well about operating systems and updating your operating systems. Does that affect how the backups are received?
So it certainly gives you options. You never want to, in an ideal world, we're not keeping legacy systems running because a lot of times there's security holes in them. They're not getting updates, they're not getting patched. But it gives you the ability to fall back on those things and not worry about something like failing hardware. We've a lot of customers that for whatever reason haven't been able to make the jump and upgrade to the latest versions of Windows, and having something like Datto that can back up an older 2008 server, 2012 server, it gives them options to keep that stuff running if that's what the business asks for. So we never like to see it, but it's nice to have that ability if you need it.
So, Brian or Ryan, I don't know if you guys have anything to add on to that.
I think Wayne pretty much nailed that. I'm going to be restating it, but to stress this point, we never really like to keep legacy systems operational. It's just there's vulnerabilities there, especially if they're not being patched. That's a challenge, right? But like you said, you could sneak some things in there, I guess you could say. I don't know, maybe get a pass on a few things if the business really needs it that way. It's like you hate to agree to do things that you know are gonna put risk into the environment. But again, it's like there's a risk of having all this data to begin with, and if the business case didn't outweigh the risks, you wouldn't do it to begin with. So there's a business case to be made. It will be made, and it can be, at least it can be accommodated, right?
Right. And one thing we've seen specifically with Datto is it almost enables you to, in some cases, get those legacy systems and turn them off because you are so confident in your backup. So a lot of times people are running a legacy system because they need it for 7 years, and it's not worth their effort to go and run an upgrade on it, or even like to take it off the network because they're worried that when they go to reintroduce it, that it's going to be a pain or they won't be able to do it. So one way we do use Datto is we'll back up those legacy systems, we'll turn them off in production, and we'll just rely on the retention either in the Datto cloud or on the appliance, so that we'll test, we'll make sure that the thing can spin up. And then if you do need that record from 10 years ago, we can spin it up, turn on that server, and get you quick access to that system. And we've tested it. We know that it doesn't change. We just need to be able to restore it. So in some ways, it actually allows us to take those legacy systems off the network and just rely on our backup system if we ever have to get them.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're just about out of time right now, so I think we're going to wrap up with the questions right there. If you guys did ask a question that wasn't answered, we'll make sure that these guys follow up with you individually via email. So don't worry about that there. So moving into our closing statements, I just wanted to thank these guys for taking the time out of their day, Brian, Ryan, and Wayne here. And then thank you guys, the attendees, for taking the time out of your day as well. We really appreciate your viewership, especially during the work week and all that stuff. We apologize about the camera mishap there, but we do have our little makeshift solution here. So we hope that didn't interrupt your value at all here. But
good DR planning.
Yes, right. Backward disaster recovery. Look at that, right on theme. We did that on purpose, actually, if you guys want to think about it that way. But yeah, here's our contact information for Charles IT here. Follow us on the socials to see all of our upcoming webinars, events, everything like that. If you have any questions for us directly, visit our website, call in, send us an email. We're friendly people. I swear, Wayne does smile on occasion. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to thank you guys for attending. Thank the speakers for taking the time to prepare for this. So yeah, if you guys want to sign off with anything, I don't know if you have any of your own sign-offs, but other than that, good to go. We appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate
Take
everyone's
care.
time today. Hopefully we were informative and helpful.
Yeah, that's the goal. All right, everybody,
All
take
right.
care, stay safe, have a great rest of your week.